My name is Jay Coulter, and this is the 100th episode of the Resilient Advisor podcast. I have been fortunate that I was early to the podcast game in our industry. It enabled me to connect with experts and thought leaders that otherwise would not have returned my calls. Our syndication on the advisorhub.com platform further expanded the audience, and now we are live broadcasting on social media platforms such as LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. The goal of each episode has always been the same: to deliver high value content in about the same amount of time as the average commute to work or workout. I have learned a lot along the way, and I hope you have as well. Some of the highlights to me include having Sean Brown, the CEO of Y Charts, come on and report results of a client communication strategy that survey that their firm conducted. The biggest takeaway for me is that our clients do not feel like they receive enough communications, and they would like those communications to be personalized. In addition, clients still care about the markets and hearing about their investment strategies. Eddie O'Brien came on, who's the CEO of eMoney Advisor, and he shared his thoughts on what he thought the future of the financial advisor looks like. He explained how artificial intelligence and robo type discussion should always be human first, but he stressed leveraging technology that is easy for collaboration and client communication is what will set the advisors apart in the future. And that was a common theme with guests that came on the show from the fintech space, including Aaron Klein, the CEO of Riskalyze. He came on and we had a more technical discussion about the application of behavioral science in our industry. He called being a financial advisor, quote, the most noble profession in the world. And he said it was that way because we live our clients' financial stress. And I tell you, I could not agree with him more. In the interview, he went deep on the applications of behavioral science in our industry and how the Riskalyze platform helps advisors implement it in their client engagements. Fintech expert Bill Winterberg came on at the perfect time. Amazon had just launched the Alexa Skills platform, and he walked advisors through how they can build their personal and professional brands with what was at the time a new technology. But there are a couple of takeaways from that interview. First, Bill on social media is fantastic if you want to stay on top of the latest trends in the fintech space. In addition, subscribe to his newsletter. You actually don't need any others in the industry. And secondly, to stand out from your competition, you need to experiment with new marketing technologies as they come out. It can give you an instant edge over your competition, but it is a lot of trial and error. One of the interesting shows I did last year was having Brad Johnson of Advisors Excel come on the podcast. And he's also a podcast host himself, host of the Elite Advisor Blueprint. I had him come on and talk about something that is fairly controversial in some circles of our industry: the application of fixed index annuities in a client's portfolio. We went through a role play where he laid out the case for adding fixed index annuities into the investment solution mix that an advisor offers. And the bottom line, FIAs can help diversify income exposure for some retirees, and you're probably selling your practice short if you don't at least consider them as part of your quiver when working with retirees. Clint Sorensen has been on the podcast many times, the chief investment officer of Wealth Shield. One of the episodes where he came on, he discussed the death of the traditional 60-40 allocation. The reason that particular episode stands out to me is because the dogma of the 60-40 portfolio is in real trouble if you look at expected forward returns. He talked about the answer to that potentially being trend following. It actually sent me down a 12-month path of doing a deep dive on trend following and how it can have an impact on mitigating risk in a portfolio. There's fascinating research in that space, and I highly recommend you take a look yourself. Other regular guests have included Chris Versace and Lenore Hopkins of Tematica Research. They're so entertaining, engaging. They come on and they share the most timely, relevant data of what's going on in the economy, both at a micro level and at a macro level. Carol Lee Roberts, who is the president of the Institute for Divorced Financial Analysts, came on to discuss some of the major pitfalls advisors need to consider when they're going through a divorce. Honestly, my prep work for that particular podcast wasn't as robust as I normally like, and I really wasn't expecting as engaging of a conversation that we had. And my specific takeaway for listeners is that if you are looking for a niche and it fits into your skill set to focus on divorcees, taking a look at the designation that her institute offers and focusing in on that space can empower you to have a real impact on some clients as they go through the most difficult thing that they may go through in their entire life. Early in this podcast. In fact, it was towards the beginning of 2017. Tom Lydon of ETF Trends came on. It was a great get for the show in the early days because he's such a well-known entity in the ETF space. We discussed what was going on in the ETF markets at the time, but one timeless piece of advice Tom offered was to encourage listeners to do a deep dive on the differences of smart beta and factor strategies, as sometimes advisors mistaken them as the same type of strategy, and that can really have an implication on your portfolio outcomes. My very first and most controversial podcast was Olympian Susie Favor Hamilton. If you're not familiar with Susie's story, she's a three-time Olympic track and field star. She went on to become a spokeswoman for Disney and then started moonlighting as a high-priced escort in Las Vegas. Once it was exposed, she became tabloid fodder and her career appeared ruined. So did her family. The story is fascinating because it is one of pure resilience. That's why I started this podcast with her story and the way she was able to pick herself up from that incredibly challenging place where she found herself. Financial advisors and NFL players have one thing in common: stress. 10-year NFL veteran John McGraw was living his childhood dream, playing for his hometown Chiefs, and he was miserable due to the stress of his job playing in the NFL. After he retired, he focused his attention on finding out why, and more importantly, how to change that mindset. John came on the podcast and he discussed his strategies for finding success and happiness through building a performance mindset. Now, this has been one of our more popular episodes, I think, because A, it's an NFL player, and B, someone talking about how he was living his dream, but utterly miserable. We also had behavioral finance expert Dr. Daniel Crosby come on the podcast, and he discussed how financial advisors can leverage what he calls a third way of looking at investing through a behavioral lens. Now, there are granular applications that you can implement in your practice if you listen to the full podcast. I encourage advisors to buy a copy of his book, The Behavioral Investor, and send it to your clients after you read it. It will have a dramatic impact on your practice. He taught advisors how to focus on results-based behavioral investing that leverages the best aspects of passive investing and behavioral science. On another episode, I had Larry Miles of Advice Period come on, and he discussed how advisors can build enterprise value in their business. And interestingly, he breaks it down into three simple things, the three Ps: people, proprietary, and process. And I really appreciated the content he shared in that episode to help advisors build that enterprise value. But here's my number one takeaway. Advisors first need to recognize that they need to build enterprise value. And I can tell you, I have found in my years of coaching and consulting that advisors really struggle with that aspect because they came into the industry as sales professionals and now they're business owners. Making that change can be difficult. Over the years, Bitcoin came up several times. Mark Yusko, who is the CEO and CIO of Morgan Creek Capital, came on and he has quickly become a thought leader on blockchain, Bitcoin, and all of its applications. My biggest takeaway from the interview is his assertion that blockchain ETFs might not provide the exposure that you're looking for. So, as always, the devil is in the details. Make sure you're getting the exposure that you are looking for by looking into the details, because just having the name Bitcoin or blockchain does not mean in the title of the product doesn't mean you're getting what you're looking for. Some of the best guests over the years have been the ones who changed my long held beliefs about investing and financial planning. Professor Jamie Hopkins came on and explained how reverse mortgages are not what they used to be. I went into this episode very, very cynical, and I came out a believer. It's a very informative episode, and really any financial advisor or financial planner who's stuck in the dogma in our industry around the idea of implementing reverse mortgages in client portfolios where it makes sense, or in client plans, you owe it to yourself to understand how they work. And this podcast is a great first step. Jamie has moved on to start working with the Carson Group, and they are fortunate to have him because he's incredibly knowledgeable on this and many retirement subjects. Another guest I had who's incredibly knowledgeable on retirement subjects is Dr. Wade Pfau. He came on and discussed his 4 approaches for managing sequence of return risk in retirement planning. The 4 that he spends the most time on in his 4 approaches are spending conservatively, maintaining flexible spending, reducing volatility when it matters most, but you've heard all that before. The 4th is buffer assets. Now, this is a contrast to the bucket system that I've used with clients and taught my whole career. Using buffer assets such as a reverse mortgage or other liquidity tools can have a real impact on managing clients through market volatility in their very important retirement years. I tell you, I have found podcasting to be incredibly helpful in both my professional and nonprofit efforts. It's an incredible platform that allows you to connect with people, build your brand. Kirk Lowe and Matt Halloran of Top Advisor Marketing are experts at building financial advisor marketing strategies. And Kirk Lowe came on one of my episodes to talk about his top 10 reasons for starting a podcast. In my book, the number one reason that Kirk mentioned is that starting a podcast gives you instant credibility. I've really enjoyed podcasting the last 4 years. I appreciate everybody who has listened, liked, shared, retweeted the content on social media. As always, if there are any topics or guests that you would like to see on the show, please send an email to podcast@jcoulter.com.